Thank you. So Honest Conversations About Racism 2.0. So Nelson Mandela did say that it is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones. Thank you, Scott. Next. This evening, we will consider the extent to which historical biases, laws, policies, and individual decisions in the criminal justice system have led to disproportionately negative outcomes for African Americans. Additionally, we will discuss some examples of national and local attempts of reform. Next slide.
It is our agreement, as in past times that we've met, to stay open, collaborate virtually, and share our voices equitably, respect confidentiality, listen fully, extend grace, be visible and remain on screen as much as possible, and embrace one another's perspectives. We respectfully ask if you cannot abide by this agreement, that you log off and know that the presentation will be available on the parish website. Please join me in centering ourselves in opening prayer for this evening through the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When our eyes do not see the gravity of racial justice, shake us from our slumber and open our eyes, O Lord. When out of fear we are frozen into inaction, give us a spirit of bravery, O Lord. When we try our best but say the wrong things, give us a spirit of humility, O Lord. When the chaos of this dies down, give us a lasting spirit of solidarity, O Lord. When it becomes easier to point fingers outwards, help us to examine our own hearts, O Lord. God of truth, in your wisdom, enlighten us. God of hope, in your kindness, heal us. Creator of all people, in your generosity, guide us. Amen. And again, courtesy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Our session agenda will consist of content. We ask that you please stay muted and save questions for the breakout sessions. It might be helpful to have a piece of paper and a pen nearby to jot down brief notes about things you find especially striking. Our breakout sessions will be facilitator-led, structured around discussion questions, a parking lot in the chat for any hard questions you all may have, or requests for further information will be available, and group sharing. Everything in this presentation, except for the breakout sessions and group sharing, will be recorded and made available on the St. John's website along with the slides. Next slide.
And so we begin this evening with the question of whether justice was really ever equal. If we look back into the 16th and 17th centuries, the attitudes towards punishment were focused on harsh punishments, where the criminal suffered pain, humiliation, and very often death. Serious crimes were punished with capital punishment, and the most common method of execution was by hanging. Between 1735 and 1868 in England and Wales, more than 9,300 people convicted of capital crimes were publicly executed. And there were over 200 capital crimes on the books, including arson, assault, burglary, counterfeiting, forgery, highway robbery, murder, piracy, rape, theft of cows, horses, and sheep. And it's important to remember that this was a time when there were no police. And the only hope you maybe had, if you were accused of a crime or the victim of a crime, was if you had the resources, financial resources mostly, to pay someone to possibly investigate the crimes. So it was never really an environment where there was equal justice for many, many years. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see an example of how that played out in the public media, as reflected in this period news article. The executions were advertised. They were public events. Men and women both suffered similar fates when convicted of capital crimes. So this is the context in which we move into the United States historical perspective.
Next slide. As evidenced by you see the graphic on the side. One on the left says Runaway Slave Patrol, and the other says Deputy Sheriff, Riverside County. Notice how both are still similar. The one on the right is present day, and obviously the one on the left is much earlier in time. In 1708, slave patrols were first formed, and thus that's what you would see, Runaway Slave Patrol badges. Nighttime patrols provided community security functions. In 1787, our U.S. Constitution declared that any person who was not free would be counted as 3/5 of a free individual for the purposes of determining congressional representation. Daytime patrols began to appear to provide 24-hour community service. In 1854, Boston formally established a full-time police department, replacing night and day watch, and other cities followed over time. Next slide. In 1865, this is when the Emancipation Proclamation, in 1863, we had the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1. In 1865, we come to the 13th Amendment, which was ratified December 6th, and it said, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Following on the heels of that was the 14th Amendment, ratified July 9 in 1868. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. In 1877, then, federal troops were withdrawn from southern states in a political compromise, and that issued in Jim Crow era black codes, vagrancy laws, and convict leasing. Convict leasing existed in former Confederate states, except Virginia, and lasted for almost 60 years. Convict leasing became a new way to continue subjecting free blacks to law enforcement action and involuntary servitude. Next slide. In this slide, you see a graph on the side, and we are coming into the 1896 Supreme Court case upholding the Louisiana state law that allowed for equal but separate accommodations. It's Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Supreme Court upheld this white man, Homer Plessy, who was complaining of having to sit next to a black man. Gave Supreme Court cover to allow states and individuals the freedom to act with impunity. And what this graph next to this piece shows is that the number of African Americans lynched annually per 100,000 residents in the southern states from 1880 to 1940. Pretty stark graph. Some, as evidenced by the graph on the right, most states saw a peak in the lynchings in the 1890s, with a notably sharp spike in Arkansas in 1910. Florida is the one noted in the 1890s. Next slide, please. And then we have a short video for convict leasing.
The labor system that took shape in the late 19th century developed coercive means to ensure that cotton remained king. It was called convict leasing. Get arrested on a minor charge or a trumped-up charge, you could find yourself locked up and then hired out to a corporation bidding on inmate labor. The pipeline from prisons to profits in this country has deep roots.
The aftermath of slavery was in some ways worse than slavery itself. Unlike before, when someone who owned you, driving you too hard was counterproductive because you would lose your investment. Convict leasing was different. You could get them cheaper, and if you actually drove them to death, there was more where that came from.
In the 13th Amendment, which ends the institution of slavery, of course, there is a loophole. Convicts who have been convicted of a crime, they actually can be forced to work for free.
In Alabama in 1850, 99% of the people who were incarcerated were white. In Alabama by the 1880s, 85% of the people incarcerated were black. So we could have a debate about how many of those black people were actually innocent, or we could have a conversation about the use of the criminal justice system to target both the innocent and the guilty alike. That continues all the way to the present, where even today, about just under 40% of the nation's prisoners are black, and yet the African-American population's about 13%. They are snatching up bodies everywhere to fuel this system.
The idea in which more money can be made out of their incarceration is still very much part of our criminal justice system.
The labor system that took shape in the late 19th century developed coercive means.
So we moved from the idea of convict leasing in the late 1800s and early 1900s to today's prison industrial complex. And the NAACP defines the prison industrial complex as a set of interest groups and institutions. Private prisons' business model is contingent upon incarcerating more and more people. In 2020, the Maryland Correctional Enterprises reported pay rates for inmates ranging from 17 cents an hour to $1.10 an hour, although some legislators in Maryland are working to increase the rates of pay. In a 2017 study, the Prison Policy Initiative documented the costs associated across the entire criminal justice system, and the conclusion was a total annual $182 billion spent every year. And the categories are reflected in proportional sizes of circles on the graph to the right. Profits from privately operated prisons are a small fraction of the overall costs associated with the activity going on, but clearly a lot of funds are involved. 7% of state prisoners, 18% of federal prisoners are employed by for-profit companies. In Texas, the NAACP reports that inmates are not paid for labor, and yet the Texas correctional industries is valued at $88.9 million in 2014. And the NAACP also estimates that the value of prison and jail industrial output across the US is $2 billion annually.
182.
Next slide. So now we go back to the historical timeline. And if we look at the 30-year period after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in 1964 and 1965, respectively, we see a significant number of federal actions and laws and legislation that led to rapidly increasing levels of incarceration. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson, one of the first presidents to ever make a public presentation and address to Congress on the issue of crime, declares a war on crime. 1971 finds President Richard Nixon declaring a war on drugs. And then in 1981, President Ronald Reagan expands the war on drugs, and with an unprecedented increase in law enforcement action. And shortly after that, 1986 finds the Congress passing the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And in 1994, President Bill Clinton signs the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. These are all well known. And if we go to the next slide, we can begin to see how these legislative and national administration actions correlate to an unprecedented increase in incarceration rates. So the graph is self-evident. It's in total number of prisoners by year. And we can see the rapid increase from the late 1970s to a peak of around 2009, when the prison population reached 1.5 million prisoners. We also have shown here the data on the U.S. homicides from the Unified Crime Reports, and reflects the number of homicides per year per 100,000 people across the U.S. And we do see there's a correlation between the decreasing homicides and the increasing levels of incarceration. Next slide. It's also important to talk about, oh, sorry, this is Natasha.
And looking at crack cocaine sentence disparity, and actually this came to the forefront of many's attention because of President Bill Clinton's 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. What that act did was it funneled a lot of money into the criminal justice system, and it was one that funneled billions for new policing and law enforcement agencies and policies. The crack cocaine sentencing disparity, and when we say sentencing disparity, is crack cocaine, was that this was from 2003 figures, that it says that in 2003, white US citizens constituted 7.8, and African Americans constituted more than 80% of the defendants sentenced under the harsher federal crack cocaine laws, despite the fact that more than 66% of crack cocaine users in the United States were white Americans and Hispanic Americans, and or actually white or Hispanics. It doesn't indicate country of origin. And so this fed into the disparity of not only those persons who are being sent to prison, but also there was a disparity in the prosecution and sentencing of those who were in possession and in use of crack cocaine versus those who were in possession and use and sold powder cocaine. Next slide, please. So fentanyl, and then just bringing us up to the current date, fentanyl and other opioids are fueling it's stated that it's fueling the worst drug crisis in the history of our country. More than 1,500 people per week had died from taking some type of opioid, according to the National Center of Health Statistics. And this was in 2022. Making opioids by far the leading cause of fatal overdoses in the country. In recent years, the crisis has become defined by fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's about 50 times more potent than heroin. Analysts say that the opioid problem started with the overprescription of legal pain medication, but it then intensified in recent years due to the influxes of cheap heroin and synthetic opioids. Now, this is an opioid epidemic, which is what it's labeled. It is not labeled a war on drugs, a war on opioid. And if you see the faces that the National Center for Health Statistics place when we're looking at those people who are targeted by this opioid epidemic, you see the representation. Next slide. Please, thank you. So national statistics on racial disparities, racial and ethnic disparities in correctional facilities. Now, this is by the Prison Policy Initiative, and they used data from the 2019 American Community Survey from the US Census Bureau. So this is, of course, people who reported. So we have 60% of those persons identify as white in the population, and 38% of those persons make up the prison population. Whereas in the blue line, it indicates that there are 13% of those population of African Americans in America, and they make 38% of persons in the prison population. Latino American, 18%, 21%, Native American, 0.9%, 2%. And this statistics, the national statistics on racial disparities is just indicating just the numbers. Next slide, please. So here in Howard County, the statistics are that, and this was from 2019, from the annual report, and it's by the Howard County government. And this is just an indication of just the numbers, total intake by race. And intake is a process either that a person has gone through either on their entrance into the Howard County Detention Center or through central booking, or being federally held, although we've changed that. So 48 Asian Americans, 1,042 African Americans, 1,044 white Americans, and then 10,000 who identify as other. And when you look at the chart on the right, you have by race, and then the estimate population, margin of error percentage, and the percentage margin of error for population. Next slide, please.
So if we think about mass incarceration across the world, looking at this chart, we can see that the US ranks at the top in terms of incarceration rates. And while we only reflect a few nations here, the Prison Policy Organization website confirms that the United States ranks at the top of all countries in the world in terms of the rates at which we incarcerate our citizens. The chart shows 664 individuals per 100,000 population in the United States. And if we look at our peers across Europe, our peer democracies, then we are imprisoning our citizens at rates that are more than 5 times our global peers. The United Kingdom at 129 inmates per 100,000 population. Even here in the state of Maryland, we have a rate of 531 inmates per 100,000 population. If we look beyond the rates at just the total numbers, the US still stands ahead. 2.3 million prisoners in the world are in the US, and that's 1 out of 5 prisoners across the world. Of course, not all nations may be quite as forthcoming in reporting these statistics as the United States, so this may need to be taken into account as you consider these statistics. Next slide. And if we take a closer look at the data over the recent period from 2001, we do see a declining trend across total persons under supervision and on probation and parole and in prisons and local jails. Next slide. In the Howard County Detention Center, there are a wide variety of programs, thankfully, that are targeted at improving the outcomes for inmates at the detention center. Just to name a few, programs for medication-assisted treatment, religious services, library, life skills education, safe food handling training, certification, graduate education diploma, partnership for employment training, literacy tutoring program, and a reentry house. Next slide. But we have to come back to the realities of the racial disparity in arrests and sentencing that led to the overrepresentation that Natasha was talking about previously. This chart reflects across the US similar statistics. 73% of the US population is white. 77% of the drug users in the past year are white. 71% of the drug possession and distribution arrests are white. And yet 31% of those sentenced to state prison for drug offenses are white and 31% are Black. For the sentencing to federal prison for drug offenses, whites are represented at only 22%, while Blacks and African Americans are represented at 38%. Next slide.
Now we come to a discussion on the school to prison pipeline. And are our children being pushed into prison? And the US has the highest incarceration rate, as we just have seen, and its prisons and jails are overwhelmingly filled with African Americans and Latinos. And the paths to prison for young African American and Latino men are many, but the starting points are often the school and the foster care system. Students of color face harsher discipline and are more likely to be pushed out of school than whites. 40% of the students are expelled from US schools each year. They're Black. 70% of students involved in school arrests or referred to law enforcement are Black or Latino. And 3.5 times the number Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than whites. Black and Latino students are twice as likely not to graduate high school than their white peers. And 68% of all males in state and federal prison do not have a high school diploma. On the right side of this, we see the foster care to prison. Youth of color are more likely than whites to be placed in the foster care system. It's a breeding ground for the criminal justice system. And 50% of children in the foster care system are Black or Latino. 30% of foster care youth entering the juvenile justice system are placement-related behavioral cases. And 25% of young people leaving foster care will be incarcerated within a few years after turning 18. 50% of our young people leaving foster care will be unemployed within a few years after turning 18. And 70% of inmates in California State Prison are former foster care youth. Next slide, please. And this is a school to prison pipeline video that we wanted to share with you.
The state locks up more than 1,000 children each year for minor offenses like truancy.
In these communities where incarceration has become so normalized, the system operates practically from cradle to grave. When you're born, your parent has likely already spent time behind bars. You're likely to attend schools that have zero tolerance policies, where police officers patrol the halls, where disputes with teachers are treated as criminal infractions, where a schoolyard fight results in your first arrest. You find that at a very, very young age, even the smallest infractions are treated as criminal. And that's where it begins. It sends this message that whether you follow the rules or you don't, you're going to jail, just like your uncle, just like your father, just like your brother, just like your neighbor. You too are going to jail. It's part of your destiny.
I hate having to lock children up. It is used as a last resort. I don't believe detention is a deterrent with adolescents. We have reduced the population in our detention facility since I've been on the bench by 30%. We took money and redirected it into the home incarceration, electronic monitoring, which allows us to let children go home far more often than it used to.
I'm really sad to say that the data plays out really clearly that once a child is involved with us formally, it increases the likelihood that they continue to be involved with us or move to the adult system. When you hear those doors locked behind you and somebody has to start calling for keys and for numbers every time you move and somebody's watching you 24 hours a day, how do you help but internalize that, especially as a child? How do you help but internalize that this must be my natural habitat?
Next slide, please. So now we come to the 2019 Howard County Public School System out-of-school suspension slide that we've seen previously, I believe, in our education discussion. This shows the enrolled, the first graph piece, or first bar on the graph, shows the number of enrolled students. And as evidenced by the blue is our Black and African-American students, and the green would be our white students, and the yellow is Hispanic Latino, and two or more ethnicities would be shown in by the red. I guess Hispanic Latino, my Asian, I guess, is the yellow, and Hispanic Latino is the gold. Anyway, when we go to the next piece, we see the disproportionate rate of suspensions in the Black African-American students compared to peers of other races and ethnicities. It's particularly stark. 68% of the Black African-American students were suspended for attacks, threats, or fighting. They make up 68% of the 24% of enrolled students that were Black and African-American. Compared to their counterparts, it's 13%. And the whites enrolled, that number was 36%. So it's very stark and very disproportionate. And you can see it all the way through the disrespect and disruption and other reasons for suspensions and dangerous substances. Next slide.
Here we have Unger v. State, and actually Unger versus State is a case that occurred here in Maryland in 2012. It was a decision by the Maryland Court of Appeals that they've changed their name by legislature. But that decision ordered retrials, reverse convictions of nearly 250 persons living who were given life sentences for violent crimes. And their trials were during the 1970s and 1980s. The Maryland Court of Appeals, in their ruling, recognized that there was a jury instruction that directed jurors to decide questions of law that was structurally flawed and fundamentally unfair, was the ruling. So the various elected officials, we have 23 state's attorneys and representing counties and Baltimore City, had to look at these cases and determine whether or not they were going to retry these cases. And again, these were cases in which people were given life sentences. So it had to do with murder or rape, serious offenses. Mr. Unger's case, by note, was retried, and he is still serving a life sentence. But there were some people who entered pleas of guilty and received sentences of time served after serving a number of decades. And so this is a piece on some of the people. And we'll just watch the first 2 minutes of it.
My name is William Gardner. I work at Second Chance. My job down there is recycling, you know, all the wiring and copper and things like that separated. Everything in this building is about Second Chance, things that we sell to the people that work here. I was incarcerated at the age of 16 in 1968. I came home from prison in 2015. 47 years, 7 months, and 1 day. I had caught a murder charge when I was 16. One of the hardest things that I had to come to terms with was understanding exactly what I'd done. The most important things to me right now is family. I got kids, grandkids, got great-grandkids. I love my family. And if I lost one of my family members to a violent crime, I understand how people feel. All I can try to do is keep going forward and maybe keep someone from following the path that I took.
My name is Stanley Mitchell. Just turned 70 in July. I'm living in Southern Maryland.
So although Unger v. State and the people who fall under those persons who had their trials or their convictions overturned, or they call themselves the Ungers, is not about disparity, nor is it about wrongful conviction, but it is an example that leads us to the Justice Reinvestment Act of 2016. Next slide, please. Because with those people who labeled themselves
my wife
Ungers,
and stepdaughter, but
those people who labeled themselves Ungers were mostly over the age of 50. There was the thought or a closer look as to whether or not those people, that population, would recidivate if they were released. In 2016, the Justice Reinvestment Act was signed here in Maryland. And what this did was it reclassified crimes, making some crimes that were felonies, misdemeanors, restructured and decreased penalties and sentences, which did away with some mandatory sentences. Increased diminution credits. Diminution credits are credits that an inmate earns off of their time. And with increased diminution credits, a person can earn up to 20 days off of every 30 days of their sentence. So if they are working in prison, if they have a job, if they're participating in education, if they have good behavior, if they have other special programs, they can earn up to 20 days off of every 30 days that they are sentenced. There are new policies for parole and probation. Parole and probation had to create a risk assessment and additional training. They restructured the penalties of parole and probation, as well as the duration. A person can, if you're doing well on parole and probation, you can earn up to 5 days off your month on the back end as you progress during your period of probation. Income earned while incarcerated, trying to structure that so that income is invested in either restitution for victims or child support. Restructuring eligibility requirement for treatment. At one point in time, a person who committed a violent crime could not seek it's not a modification of sentence, but it is a change in sentence. And that is going to an inpatient treatment facility. Instead of being incarcerated, they would be moved from the Division of Corrections to an inpatient treatment facility, which would in fact change their sentence. And then from the inpatient facility, they would move into a halfway house, and then they would then begin parole or probation. So it restructured eligibility requirements, now allowing those people who were convicted of violent crimes to have that opportunity. And also it opened avenues for the expungement of records, which would allow those people who are re-entering into the community to seek loans, to seek scholarships, to seek other employment without having to disclose this prior conviction that might have hampered their abilities in doing so. Next slide, please. Here in Howard County in 2021, we have the LEAD program, and the LEAD program, the partners are on the right. It's the Howard County Health Department, Police Department, Sheriff's Department, Public Defender's Office, the State's Attorney's Office, the Howard County Detention Center, and general Howard County government. And it works as if when a person is encountered by law enforcement, a law enforcement officer, they're provided with a referral instead of charging the person with a crime. There is, wraparound support. The person is assigned a case manager, peer specialist. There's an intake process, including assessment and a support plan. And also they maintain contact with the support team to obtain the services that persons need to meet their goals. And this is also a way of addressing behavioral or mental health needs, as well as substance needs. Next slide, please. Also here in Howard County in 2021, we have the Restorative Justice Program. And there are restorative justice programs that are out in the rest of the country. But the foundational principles of the Restorative Justice Program is the fact that crime causes harm to people, and also we should focus on repairing the harm when we can, that the people most affected by the crime should be able to participate in the resolution. Victims' involvement and the defendant's ability to change and accept responsibility for their actions is essential. The State's Attorney's Office is responsible for overseeing the process and ensuring that the party agrees with the outcome. And this is not a part of the judicial system, right? This is a non-judicial system-based solution. And so, the RJP provides an entirely different way of thinking about crime and our response to crime. This approach operates from the belief that crime is a violation of people and relationships, and the path to justice lies in problem solving and healing rather than punishment and mandated by the state. Now, there are a few crimes that allows a person to be eligible. They're not violent crimes. And so some of these offenses include loitering, trespassing, second-degree assaults, minor second-degree assaults, vandalism, rogue and vagabond, which is when someone is peering in a vehicle, maybe trying to break into a vehicle, and charges of that nature. And it's reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please.
So we'll move our discussion to the ultimate punishment for a crime, which is the death penalty. And that is still an option in the judicial systems in 27 states. 23 states have abolished the death penalty as of 2023. Several recently, including Maryland, which abolished the death penalty in 2013, and locally Virginia in 2021. It's noted on the slide that the vote in Maryland was 27-20. Next slide. This slide presents the number of executions since 1976, 1,568 executions across the United States, with a peak in 1999, during which 98 people were executed. Note that the rapid rise in executions to the peak correlates with what we saw in terms of the rapid rise in the law enforcement action and mass incarceration during the same period of time. Next slide. If we look at the racial inequity in the application of the death penalty cases, we see the Black community overrepresented in the pie chart on the left at 34% of the defendants executed. Looking at the race of the victims in the pie chart on the right, we see that more than 75% of the cases in which the death penalty was carried out involved a victim that was white, even though nationally only 50% of murder victims are white. Next slide, please. There have been a number of studies on the racial inequality across the US in the death penalty cases. And perhaps the most striking result is from the study which looked at interracial murder cases. And the death penalty was carried out in these cases at much higher rates when the defendant was Black and the victim was white. And in that study, they found 304 cases in which the defendant was executed. Whereas when the white defendant was white and the victim was Black, there were only 21 cases over the same period of time in the study. Next slide, please. We take a pause for a moment to reflect on the wise words of Benjamin Franklin, who wrote a letter in 1785 to Benjamin Vaughan, in which he expressed the following thought: that it is better 100 guilty persons should escape than that one innocent person should suffer, is a maxim that has been long and generally approved, never that I know of controverted. Certainly a level of mercy that's not common. Next slide, please. So if we look at the exonerations over the past 40 years of death row inmates, we find the majority of these are for Black individuals. The geographic distribution is interesting and presented in the chart of the US on the top of the slide. Next slide.
So in this slide, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Equal Justice Initiative provided this with us, and in a 2021 study, an audit was conducted among 10 criminal cases, 5 cases featuring a white defendant and 5 featuring a Black defendant. All cases had criminal proceedings that occurred in the past 7 years. The Global Strategy Group analyzed 20 to 30 articles for each case, for a total of 257 articles, all of which were randomly selected and included a combination of national and local online coverage. And you can see the stark disparities that exist between the types of images used for Black and white defendants. The mugshot being the first line, and the white defendants 9% of the time, Black defendants 45%. In the jumpsuit, the orange jumpsuit, notably, white defendants 0%, and Black 8%. And in the suit, wearing a suit, 13% of white defendants to the counterpart of 6% of the Black defendants. Next slide, please. And racial bias in media coverage of crime. And these are 2 side-by-side images, equal in same news outlet. And you can see the difference. The 3 on the left, they're all in suits, and are African Black individuals on the right, and not in suits. Next slide.
Elected officials endorse returning to lynching, and this occurred this year. During a conversation after a county commission meeting recorded on March the 6th, Sheriff Kevin Clardy, Sheriff's Office employees, as well as elected officials in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, expressed a desire to return to the era when Black people were lynched. One quoted, "I'm going to tell you something. If it was back in the day when Alan Marston would take a damn Black guy and whip their ass and throw him in the cell, I'd run for fucking sheriff," District 2 Commissioner Mark Jennings said. This is according to the McCurtain Gazette News, which is a print-only publication that was released, and there was a transcript of the recording. And I will say that it did note that recording of the conversations was not illegal because there was no expectation of privacy because it was after a public meeting. The sheriff is recorded saying, "Yeah, well, it's not like that no more." And Jennings says, "I know, take them down to Mud Creek and hang them up with a damn rope, but you can't do that anymore. They got more rights than we got." And it did note that this was the second time in the last 2 months that white elected officials had spoken positively about racial terror lynchings. So that was just a month or so ago. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an unescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial outsider agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds." This quote brings context to this particular slide. Just as in all of our other sessions, we have shared how we are here in Maryland and how we are here in Howard County and in the rest of the country. I am a prosecutor here in Howard County, Maryland, and I am proud to be one. And here in Howard County, Maryland, we take it very serious. Our biases that we might have, justice of the individual who's accused, and the community in which we serve. But that being said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are many times and places where racism and bias can touch a person in the criminal justice system. It can start with first the reason for the initial contact of the civilian and law enforcement. Did someone call the police because they suspected a Black person of committing a crime or of bothering them? Did the law enforcement officer, in being biased, use racial profiling? Was the person arrested, or were they provided with a summons? What charges were lodged against them? With pretrial, were they released on their own recognizance, which is a promise to pay, a promise to appear in court and to pay should they not? Or was there a bond? Or was there home detention? Or was there no bond and they are incarcerated awaiting trial? What charges were levied against them? Were there mandatory minimums? Their attorney, the attorney they have, whether they be private, whether they be a member of the Office of the Public Defender, whether they be a prosecutor. Is there racism or bias? Plea negotiations. Is there disparity in plea negotiations based on someone's race? When they go to trial, is the judge biased? Is there racism? With a jury, after seeing images, after reading articles, is there a bias against a person of color or an African-American person where they will not receive a fair sentence or a fair trial? Moving to sentencing. Is there racism or bias that affects the sentence one gets? When they're incarcerated, we have heard that there are jobs that one can receive when they're incarcerated. There are programs that a person can participate. But is there racism or bias in selecting those people who have that opportunity? Parole and probation. The person who is supervising you, who can file a motion to request that your liberty is placed in threat. Is there racism? Is there bias there? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Next slide, please.
Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups. The rate of incarceration now is about 5 times higher than it was historically. Historically it was 100 per 100,000, now it's about 500 per 100,000. If we look at prison, if we add jail to that, it's about 700 per 100,000. Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about Black men who were born in the late 1970s and who were growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of Black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9. Research shows that kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out. And there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls. And there's a very real risk here that incarceration becomes an inherited trait. The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty, and we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.
So we're going to now break out into our break groups. I'm going to ask everyone's indulgence. We are at 8:11. We usually try to have a hard stop at an hour and a half. As I had started with, there was a lot of content and a lot that we just didn't share. But I would like for us to be able to have true, honest conversations. And so if we could still set the clock at 30 minutes, and then hopefully we will just only be like 15 minutes over time. So Scott, if you can send us all in our breakout groups and bring us back at 8:41, I guess.
Welcome back, everybody. We'd like to invite a few groups to provide a brief summary of their discussions. Anybody want to volunteer, or shall I pick people? Anna, go ahead. Thank you.
Our group had a good discussion. We were a little overwhelmed by the first question, just because it seemed, like it would be a great solution on the front, but then there's, as Natasha pointed out, so many points in the whole process where the racial bias can come in. But then we remembered, what? It's the little pieces, little by little, we can get there, the little nuggets, or as Liz put it, you put a drop in the bucket to try to move in the right direction. So that was our big takeaway.
Anybody else? Another facilitator? Donna and Terry, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
I can.
Teresa.
I can go.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
We had
go
a
ahead.
very good discussion. We got a little off topic because we went down some rabbit holes, but it was really very good. I mean, it's a little depressing with having all those statistics, but as one of our members, Ryan, brought out, it said that, when you look at all of our previous presentations, if we could look at each of those and summarize the key points, they all really ended up leading to the criminal justice system, because what was systemic racism in each of those other areas leads us here. And I guess the overwhelming thing for us is, what do you do about it? Where do we go from here and make a difference to change that when you see in the newspaper what's going on? There's so much hate and so much racism and so much fear of people that we won't even talk to and get to know, that where do we go,
Thank you for that. Thank you.
And we were in a group and I ended up facilitating some, but everybody helped. So it was not really necessary to facilitate. But anyway, we had a good discussion too, and we actually didn't follow the questions either. We just started,
Okay.
What was really sticking out to us, and we had good comments, and we actually started already what we're going to do the next session, what kind of actions can we take? What can we do? And I mean, there were some good ideas, and I think one discussion was that in the school, the teaching needs to start in the school, that there already open up the minds and bring changes. Also discussed that it is systemic, that we have to start at the local level and venture out until we nationwide with this. And what, you know, that we can be active prison ministries, our library does a lot. I hope, if I don't say this right, please, the one who said it in our group, what happens on Sundays when we said we should, we have segregation of the churches?
Oh, I said Sunday's the most segregated day of the week. So that's Martin Luther King has always said that, and it's very true.
Yeah. And that the churches need to come together and work together. And correct me if I'm not paraphrasing it in the right way, but I thought that was a very, very poignant statement, or, you know, said a lot to me. And yeah.
One more, Donna and Terry.
Yeah, so I think the group felt that there was surprise in the group with respect to Howard County, that Howard County itself was not as progressive as it potentially could be. And you looked at some of the school suspensions and potentially incarcerations. Also, I think there was the thought that, you know, if there really are other, as in the film, there are other alternatives to prison, why is prison our go-to solution, as opposed to looking at other alternative programs, whether it's mental health or education or whatever the program may be. With respect to uniform sentencing, we also discussed, you know, a lot of the concern about, you know, the need or the access to a good attorney, to good counsel, and you know, certain folks, because of poverty, because of background, may not have access to you know, at the same level of representation as someone who is very wealthy, well off, or whatever. So again, part of the uniform sentencing also has to, I think, address the uniformity of counsel and attorney capabilities.
Thank you for sharing.
Ooh.
There we go.
So we are going to close with our prayer, but someone has already, I think I made a plug in the beginning, and someone just made a plug. Maria made a plug just now, but on the 17th of May, we will be in person with each other with the Way Forward. And it's at 7 p.m. There will be the registration. And also, I didn't mention this, but Liz, can you get a survey together? Because oh, and also thank you, Julie. So there's going to be pizza and beverages start at 6:30 with some fellowshipping, and then the program will start at 7. So please be there. It'd be great to see everyone in person. And with that, if we can have our closing prayer.
This is Wild Lake, by the way, Natasha.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Yes, it's going to be at Wild Lake.
So we'll end with a closing prayer, and please mute. And I guess we don't have it up on the screen, so just reflect on the prayer here. O Lord our God, in your mercy and kindness, no thought of ours is left unnoticed, no desire or concern ignored. You have proven that blessings abound when we fall on our knees in prayer, and so we turn to you in our hour of need. Surrounded by violence and cries for justice, we hear your voice telling us what is required. only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk humbly with your God. Fill us with your mercy so that we, in turn, may be merciful to others. Strip away pride, suspicion, and racism so that we may seek peace and justice in our communities. Strengthen our hearts so that they beat only to the rhythm of your holy will. Flood our path with your light as we walk humbly toward a future filled with encounter and unity. Be with us, O Lord, in our efforts, for only by the prompting of your grace can we progress toward virtue. We ask this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again for spending your time with us. And I would like for those members of the Racial Justice Committee, if you can just stay on for just a few minutes after we close, just quickly. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us and for being committed to joining us in this session and the other sessions. And of course, this was the last one, but to all of the members of the Racial Justice Committee who facilitated, who led the sessions, did a lot of work. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. So thank you. Everyone have a great evening. Okay.